Eleanor Montgomery's breath caught in her throat as she watched her husband stride past her without so much as a sideways glance. The year was 1875, and Redding, California was growing from a small frontier settlement into a bustling town, thanks to the railroad that had arrived 2 years prior. But inside the grand house that perched at the edge of town, Eleanor might as well have been a ghost for all the notice she received. "Thomas," she said softly, reaching out a hand toward his retreating back, "will you be home for supper this evening?" Her husband of 3 years paused only long enough to adjust his cravat in the hall mirror. "Don't wait up, Eleanor. The mill expansion requires my attention well into the night." Eleanor dropped her hand, her reflection faint behind his commanding presence in the glass. At 22, she had become accustomed to the hollow echo of her footsteps in the large house, to meals eaten alone, and to the pitying glances from the housekeeper, Mrs. Finch. "Very well," she replied, though Thomas had already opened the front door. "I'll leave a plate." The door closed with a definitive click, cutting off her words. Eleanor stared at the polished oak, wondering how it was possible to disappear so completely while still breathing. The Montgomery home stood as one of the finest in Redding, with its 2 stories and wrap-around porch. Thomas had built it to showcase his prosperity as the owner of the town's largest lumber mill. Eleanor had been 18 when he'd proposed, dazzled by his confidence and promises of security after her father's death had left her with little means. Now, 3 years into their marriage, she realized the home was merely another possession for him to display, much like herself, decorative but rarely engaged with. "Mrs. Montgomery." Mrs. Finch appeared in the hallway, her gray hair pulled back in its usual severe bun. "Will Mr. Montgomery be joining you for supper tonight?" "No, Mrs. Finch, just set a place for me." The housekeeper's lips pursed slightly. "Again? That makes 10 days this month." "The mill requires much of his time," Eleanor replied automatically, the excuse worn smooth from repetition. "Mrs. Finch nodded, though her eyes held the same concern Eleanor had grown to resent. "Very well. I'll inform cook." Eleanor wandered to the parlor window, gazing at the bustling Main Street. Wagons rolled by and townspeople hurried about their business. The mountains loomed in the distance, wild and untamed despite the encroaching civilization. She pressed her fingertips to the glass. In 3 years, she'd made no real friends in Redding. Thomas discouraged what he called excessive socializing, preferring her to maintain the house and be available when he required a hostess for business associates. Her life had shrunk to the confines of these walls, her voice growing quieter with each passing month. That evening, Eleanor sat alone at the massive oak dining table. The clink of her fork against fine china echoed in the room. Mrs. Finch had departed after serving the meal, and cook was busy in the kitchen. Outside, the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that nobody else in the house bothered to notice. "I was thinking of redecorating the sitting room," Eleanor said aloud, just to hear a human voice. "Perhaps new curtains." No one answered, of course. She set down her fork, appetite gone. Tomorrow, Thomas would host a dinner for potential investors. She would smile and pour tea and speak when spoken to. She would be visible for those few hours, only to fade away again when the guests departed. A sudden determination welled within her. She stood, abandoning her half-eaten meal, and walked to the small writing desk in the corner of the parlor. Pulling out a sheet of paper, she penned a note. "I require fabric samples for new curtains. We'll visit Mercer's Dry Goods tomorrow at 10. She placed it prominently on Thomas's desk. He might not see it. He rarely noticed her notes. But the act of writing it, of declaring an intention, made her feel momentarily substantial. The next morning, Eleanor dressed with unusual care, selecting a blue calico dress that matched her eyes. She pinned her dark blonde hair in a simple but elegant style and added a touch of color to her pale cheeks. Mrs. Finch raised her eyebrows but said nothing as Eleanor announced her intention to go into town. The May sunshine warmed her face as she walked the short distance to the main street. Her heartbeat quickened with a nervous excitement. It had been weeks since she'd ventured out alone. Mercer's Dry Goods occupied a prominent position on Main Street. The bell above the door announced her arrival, and Mrs. Mercer, a plump woman with quick eyes, looked up from where she was measuring fabric. "Mrs. Montgomery, what a pleasant surprise. We don't often see you in town." The unspoken question hung in the air. "I'm considering new curtains for the sitting room," Eleanor explained, her voice sounding unnaturally high to her own ears. "Something in blue, perhaps, or green." "Of course. I just received some lovely fabrics on the train last week. Let me show you." As Mrs. Mercer bustled around the store, pulling down bolts of fabric, Eleanor felt herself relaxing. Here was someone who saw her, who addressed her directly instead of looking through her. The bell above the door jingled again, and Eleanor turned, instinctively stepping aside to make room for the new customer. The man who entered seemed to bring the outdoors with him, sun-bronzed skin, shoulders broad beneath a worn leather vest, and eyes as startlingly blue as the mountain lakes. Dust coated his boots and the lower part of his denim trousers, suggesting a long ride. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Morning, Mrs. Mercer," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Got that order of nails I asked for, Mr. Weston?" "Indeed I do. Just arrived yesterday." Mrs. Mercer set down the fabric she'd been showing Eleanor. "Let me fetch them from the back. Meanwhile, have you met Mrs. Montgomery? Her husband owns the lumber mill." The cowboy turned, and Eleanor felt the full impact of his gaze. Unlike most people in town who looked at her as Thomas Montgomery's quiet wife or, worse, didn't really look at her at all, this man's eyes met hers directly. There was something disconcertingly honest in that blue gaze. "Isaac Weston, madam." He inclined his head slightly. "Pleased to make your acquaintance." "Eleanor Montgomery," she replied, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "Are you new to Reading, Mr. Weston? I don't believe we've met before." A small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "Been here about 6 months. Got a small ranch about 5 miles east of town. Nothing fancy, but it suits me fine." "Mr. Weston broke one of those wild mustangs from the North Hills," Mrs. Mercer interjected as she returned with a paper-wrapped package. "The big black one nobody else could get near. Quite the horseman." Isaac Weston's expression remained modest, but Eleanor noticed a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Just takes patience, is all," he said, accepting the package. "And respect. Horse has to know you see him for what he is, not what you want him to be." Something about his words resonated with Eleanor, though she couldn't have explained why. She found herself studying his face, the lines at the corners of his eyes, suggesting he smiled often, the straight set of his shoulders that spoke of hard work rather than social pretension. "Are you selecting fabric, Mrs. Montgomery?" he asked, nodding toward the colorful bolts on the counter. The simple question evidenced that he noticed what she was doing caught her off guard. "Yes, new curtains. For the sitting room." She inwardly cringed at her stilted response. "The blue would brighten the room, especially when the sun hits it," he commented, gesturing to a bolt of cornflower blue fabric. Eleanor blinked in surprise. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Their eyes met again, and for a strange, suspended moment, Eleanor felt a connection to this stranger that she hadn't felt with another person in years. He saw her not as Thomas Montgomery's wife, or as a piece of the carefully arranged household, but as a woman selecting fabric. The moment broke when Mrs. Mercer cleared her throat. "The blue is lovely quality, came all the way from San Francisco." Isaac Weston placed his hat back on his head. "I should let you return to your shopping, Mrs. Montgomery. Good day to you. Mrs. Mercer, much obliged for the nails." As he turned to leave, Eleanor found herself saying, "Mr. Weston," he paused, looking back at her with those attentive eyes. "Thank you for the suggestion. About the blue." His smile was brief but genuine. "Just speaking the truth as I see it, madam." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, the bell announcing his departure. Eleanor stood motionless, feeling as though something significant had just occurred, though she couldn't have explained what. After a moment, she turned back to Mrs. Mercer. "I'll take 10 yards of the blue, please." Walking home with her purchase wrapped in brown paper, Eleanor felt more alert, more present in her surroundings than she had in months. She noticed the wildflowers growing between buildings, heard the laughter of children playing near the schoolhouse, and observed the new sign being painted on the sheriff's office. And she thought of Isaac Weston, the rancher with the direct gaze who had, in the space of a brief encounter, made her feel more visible than she had in years. At home, she unwrapped the fabric on the dining table, imagining how it would transform the sitting room. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of enthusiasm for something in her life. The front door opened and closed, bringing her back to reality. Thomas's footsteps sounded in the hall. Surprised by his early return, Eleanor quickly folded the fabric and tucked it under her arm. "Eleanor," Thomas called, his voice sharp. "Where are you?" "In the dining room," she answered, smoothing her skirt nervously. He appeared in the doorway, his expression displeased. "Mrs. Finch tells me you went into town this morning, alone." Eleanor straightened her spine. "Yes. I left a note on your desk. I needed fabric for new curtains. You know I don't approve of you wandering about unaccompanied." Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair. At 42, he was 20 years her senior and treated her more like a child than a wife. "What will people think? Seeing my wife traipsing about town like some farmer's daughter." The spark that had been kindled by her trip to town, and perhaps by her encounter with Isaac Weston, flickered dangerously. "I hardly think selecting fabric constitutes traipsing," she said, her voice quieter than she would have liked but steady. "And I was perfectly respectable." Thomas gave her a long, hard look. "The investors will be here at 7. Wear the green dress, it makes you look less pale. And have cook prepare that roast they enjoyed last time." Without waiting for her response, he turned and headed toward his study. "I'll be working until dinner. Don't disturb me." Eleanor remained still, the wrapped fabric clutched to her chest like a shield. The momentary confidence she had felt ebbed away, leaving behind the familiar hollowness. But somewhere, deep inside, a tiny flame remained, refusing to be extinguished completely. The dinner party that evening unfolded exactly as dozens before it had. Eleanor wore the green dress, smiled at appropriate moments, and spoke only when directly addressed. She poured coffee and brandy for the men and then excused herself, knowing they preferred to discuss business without female presence. In her bedroom, she removed her jewelry and unpinned her hair, letting it fall in waves down her back. The house below hummed with male voices and occasional laughter. She was unnecessary, now invisible again. She walked to the window and looked out at the night sky, where stars blazed above the mountains. Somewhere out there, beyond the lights of town, was Isaac Weston's ranch. She imagined him sitting on a porch, perhaps, enjoying the quiet after a day's work. Did he live alone? She hadn't thought to ask, and Mrs. Mercer hadn't said. Eleanor pressed her forehead against the cool glass, wondering why she was thinking about a man she had met for less than 5 minutes. Perhaps because he had really looked at her when everyone else seemed to see through her. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Thomas had gone to bed in his separate room, Eleanor lay awake, contemplating the blue fabric hidden in her sewing chest. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin work on the curtains. It was a small act of assertion, but it was hers. The next week passed in a blur of household duties and social obligations. Eleanor worked on the curtains when alone, carefully measuring and cutting the fabric. Mrs. Finch watched her with quiet approval, occasionally offering suggestions but mostly leaving her to the task. Thomas, when he noticed the project at all, merely grunted that she should ensure the curtains were properly lined to prevent sun damage to the furniture. Eleanor said nothing about the blue fabric or her encounter with Isaac Weston. Both seemed like private treasures, small bright spots in the monotony of her days. On Saturday morning, she was in the kitchen garden, cutting herbs for cook, when she heard hoofbeats on the road. Looking up, she was startled to see Isaac Weston approaching on a magnificent black horse. Her heart gave an inexplicable leap at the sight of him. He reined in at the garden gate, removing his hat. "Mrs. Montgomery, good morning. Mr. Weston." She straightened, suddenly conscious of her gardening apron and loose hair. "This is unexpected. I hope I'm not intruding." His eyes were as direct as she remembered. "I'm delivering some timber posts to homes on this road. Your husband ordered some for a property boundary." Oh, Eleanor had no knowledge of this. Thomas rarely discussed business matters with her. "I'm afraid my husband isn't home. He's at the mill." Isaac nodded. "That's all right. I can leave them by your barn. Just wanted to let someone know before I started unloading." "Of course." She hesitated, then added, "Would you care for some water? It's a warm day." A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That's mighty kind of you, Mrs. Montgomery. I'd appreciate it." Eleanor hurried to the kitchen, filled a glass from the pump, and returned to the garden. Isaac had dismounted and was standing by the gate, one hand resting on his horse's neck. "Thank you," he said, accepting the water. His fingers brushed hers briefly, sending an unexpected shiver up her arm. She stepped back, folding her hands at her waist. "Your horse is beautiful." Isaac's expression softened as he glanced at the animal. "This is Midnight, the Mustang Mrs. Mercer mentioned. Took me 3 months just to get close enough to touch him." He stroked the horse's glossy neck. "He's still got his wild spirit, but we've come to an understanding." Eleanor moved closer to the gate, fascinated by the bond between man and horse. "May I?" she asked, extending a hand tentatively. "Slow and easy," Isaac advised. "Let him come to you." She held her hand out, palm up, waiting. After a moment's consideration, Midnight stretched his neck and snuffled her palm. His breath was warm against her skin. "He likes you," Isaac said softly. Eleanor looked up, surprised to find him watching her rather than the horse. There was something in his gaze, admiration, perhaps, or simple kindness, that made her cheeks warm. "How did you tame him?" she asked, gently stroking Midnight's velvet nose. "I didn't tame him. I earned his trust." Isaac's voice was thoughtful. "Spent weeks just sitting near where he grazed. Didn't try to approach him, just let him get used to me being there. Let him see me for who I was." "And who are you, Mr. Weston?" The question slipped out before Eleanor could consider its propriety. He didn't seem offended. "Just a man who prefers honest work and open country to town politics and fancy parlors." His eyes held hers. "How about those curtains, Mrs. Montgomery? Did you start them yet?" The fact that he remembered, that he asked about something important to her, however small, made Eleanor's breath catch. "Yes, they're nearly finished." She smiled, a genuine expression that felt strange on her face after so many practiced social smiles. "The blue is perfect." It catches the light exactly as you said it would. A wagon rattled down the road, breaking the moment. Eleanor stepped back, suddenly aware of how long they had been talking. "I should let you get to your deliveries," she said quickly. Isaac nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll unload those posts by your barn. Please tell Mr. Montgomery their pressure-treated should last 20 years at least." "I will." Though she knew Thomas wouldn't care what she had to say about fence posts, Isaac mounted midnight with an easy grace. "Good day, Mrs. Montgomery. Enjoy those blue curtains." As she watched him ride toward the barn, Eleanor realized she was clutching her herb scissors so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She forced her fingers to relax and turned back to the herbs, but her mind remained on Isaac Weston, on the way he looked at her, as if she were not only visible but worth seeing. That evening, Thomas noticed neither the herbs in the stew nor Eleanor's mention of the delivered fence posts. He ate quickly, commented that the new mills in Oregon might affect their timber prices, and retreated to his study with a ledger. Eleanor sat alone in the dining room long after he'd gone, watching shadows lengthen across the table. Finally, she rose and walked to the sitting room where the new blue curtains hung at the windows. She reached out and touched the fabric, remembering Isaac's words. The blue would brighten the room, especially when the sun hits it. He had been right. And he had truly seen her when she felt like a ghost in her own home. 2 weeks passed. Eleanor finished the curtains and hung them in the sitting room. Thomas barely noticed the change, though Mrs. Finch proclaimed them a vast improvement, and even Cook commented on how the room seemed cheerier. Eleanor found herself looking for Isaac Weston whenever she ventured into town, which she did more frequently now, inventing small errands that required her attention. She told herself she was simply enjoying her newfound independence, but she couldn't deny the quickening of her pulse whenever she spotted a tall figure in a worn leather vest. On a particularly warm June day, Eleanor decided to visit the millinery shop to have her summer bonnet refurbished. She was selecting ribbons when the shop door opened, admitting Mabel Wilson, the doctor's wife and one of Redding's most notorious gossips. "Eleanor Montgomery," Mabel exclaimed with exaggerated delight. "How lovely to see you out and about. We so rarely catch a glimpse of you these days." "Hello, Mrs. Wilson," Eleanor nodded politely. "I'm just selecting some new ribbons. Of course, of course." Mabel moved closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I must say I was quite surprised to hear about your conversation with that rancher. What was his name? Weston?" Eleanor's fingers stilled on the ribbons. "Mr. Weston delivered some fence posts to our property. I merely thanked him." Mabel's eyes gleamed with undisguised interest. "My dear, there's no need for modesty. Mrs. Jenkins was passing by and said you two were in quite the animated conversation. At your garden gate, no less." Eleanor felt a flush creeping up her neck. "We exchanged pleasantries, nothing more. Mr. Weston is a business associate of my husband's." Mabel fingered a lace handkerchief. "Well, I thought you should know that people are talking. A proper lady doesn't engage in lengthy conversations with men like that, especially not with her hair down." She clicked her tongue. Think of Thomas's position in the community. Anger flared within Eleanor, hot and unexpected. "Mr. Weston is a respectable businessman, Mrs. Wilson. And I fail to see how a civil conversation at my own garden gate could possibly affect my husband's standing." Mabel's eyebrows rose at Eleanor's uncharacteristic sharpness. "My dear, I only mentioned it out of concern for you. Young wives must be so careful about appearances." "Thank you for your concern," Eleanor replied stiffly. "If you'll excuse me, I need to finish my errands." She paid for a simple blue ribbon, refusing to let Mabel's gossip alter her selection, and left the shop with her head held high. But as she walked home, her indignation gave way to a creeping unease. Would Thomas hear these whispers? What would he think? More disturbing was the realization that she cared more about the possibility of never speaking to Isaac Weston again than she did about her husband's reaction. That night, as she brushed her hair before the mirror, Eleanor confronted the truth she had been avoiding. In the course of 2 brief encounters, Isaac Weston had made her feel more alive, more present than she had felt in years of marriage to Thomas. The cowboy had looked at her and seen Eleanor not Mrs. Thomas Montgomery, not a decorative addition to a successful man's household, but a woman with thoughts and feelings of her own. The knowledge was both exhilarating and terrifying. A week later, Thomas announced that he would be traveling to San Francisco on business. "I'll be gone for at least 10 days, he told Eleanor over breakfast. "The railroad investors are interested in expanding our timber operation. This could mean significant growth for the mill." Eleanor nodded, keeping her expression appropriately interested while her mind raced with the unexpected gift of freedom. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning. I've instructed Mrs. Finch about the household accounts. You needn't concern yourself." Of course not, Eleanor thought bitterly. She was trusted to select curtain fabric but not to manage household expenses. "Will you be attending church while I'm away?" Thomas asked, studying her over the rim of his coffee cup. "Of course," she replied, knowing this was the expected answer. Thomas nodded approvingly. "Good. And I expect you'll maintain propriety in my absence. No unnecessary trips to town or receiving visitors who aren't appropriate." His gaze was sharp, and Eleanor wondered with a jolt if he had heard the gossip about her conversation with Isaac Weston. She kept her expression neutral. "I will behave as I always do, Thomas. See that you do." He returned to his newspaper, the subject closed. The next morning, Eleanor stood on the porch and waved as Thomas's carriage disappeared down the road toward the train station. She remained there long after he was gone, savoring the lightness that spread through her body, a physical release, as if tight bindings had suddenly loosened. "Will you be needing anything special for dinner, Mrs. Montgomery?" Mrs. Finch asked from the doorway. Eleanor turned, a smile spreading across her face. "No, Mrs. Finch. In fact, I think I'll have a simple tray in my room tonight. I plan to start a new book." Mrs. Finch's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "As you wish, madam." For 3 days, Eleanor reveled in the small freedoms of Thomas's absence. She ate what and when she pleased, spent hours reading in the garden, and even persuaded cook to teach her how to make strawberry preserves, a task Thomas would have considered beneath his wife's dignity. On the 4th day, she decided to ride into town. Thomas had never allowed her to ride alone, insisting it wasn't proper, but Eleanor had been an accomplished horsewoman before her marriage. She missed the freedom of the saddle. She had the stable boy saddle her mare, Daisy, ignoring his surprised expression. "I'll be back before supper, James," she told him, gathering the reins. "There's no need to mention this to Mr. Montgomery when he returns." James touched the brim of his cap. "Yes, madam." The 5-mile ride to town was glorious. June had painted the landscape in vibrant greens and wildflower yellows. Eleanor let Daisy canter along the road, relishing the wind against her face and the rhythmic movement beneath her. For the first time in years, she felt fully alive, fully present in her body and in the world, in town. She tied Daisy at the hitching post outside the Mercantile. She needed writing paper and had decided to treat herself to some peppermint drops, a childhood favorite she rarely indulged in now. As she stepped out of the store, paper-wrapped package in hand, a familiar voice called her name. "Mrs. Montgomery." Eleanor turned to find Isaac Weston approaching from the direction of the bank. The sight of him sent an unexpected thrill through her body. "Mr. Weston, good afternoon." He tipped his hat, those blue eyes taking in her riding habit and the horse waiting patiently nearby. "You ride," he said, approval evident in his voice. "I do." She smiled, unable to hide her pleasure at his observation, "though not as often as I'd like. Your mare looks well-bred. Good lines." "Daisy was my 18th birthday gift from my father." Eleanor stroked the mare's neck. "She's gentle but loves to run." Isaac studied the horse with a practiced eye. "Spirited, I'd say, rather than merely gentle. There's intelligence in those eyes." Again, Eleanor was struck by how he saw beyond surfaces, noticing qualities others missed. "Yes, she is spirited. That's precisely right." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken when Isaac asked, "Are you headed home now, Mrs. Montgomery?" "Yes, I just needed a few supplies." She hesitated, then added, "My husband is away on business in San Francisco." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, concern, perhaps. "It's a long ride back to your place. Would you mind some company on the road? I'm headed out that way myself." Eleanor knew she should refuse. Riding alone with a man who wasn't her husband would set Redding's gossips aflame. But the prospect of conversation with Isaac Weston, of being seen and heard by him again, was too tempting to resist. "I would welcome the company, Mr. Weston." He smiled, and the warmth of it reached his eyes. "Let me get Midnight from the livery. I won't be but a minute." As he walked away, Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself against a wave of conflicting emotions. This was improper, she knew it was, but it was also the most alive she had felt in years. Isaac returned mounted on Midnight, the black Mustang prancing slightly as they approached. "Ready, Mrs. Montgomery," she nodded, gathering Daisy's reins and mounting with practiced ease. Together, they rode out of town at a leisurely pace. "How are those blue curtains working out?" Isaac asked once they were beyond the last buildings. Eleanor glanced at him, surprised and pleased that he remembered. "Beautifully. They change the entire feeling of the room. Sometimes the smallest changes make the biggest difference." He guided Midnight around a rut in the road. "Did your husband appreciate them?" The question was innocent, but Eleanor felt a twinge of discomfort. "Thomas doesn't notice such things much." Isaac was quiet for a moment. "That's a shame. They were your creation, after all." The simple acknowledgement of her efforts, so rare in her life, touched Eleanor deeply. Yes, they were." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic hoofbeats and distant birdsong. It was a companionable silence, comfortable in a way Eleanor hadn't experienced in years. "May I ask you something, Mrs. Montgomery?" Isaac's voice was gentle. "Of course. Are you happy?" The directness of the question took her breath away. No one had ever asked her that, not her husband, not Mrs. Finch, not the ladies of the church circle who sometimes invited her to tea. The truth rose to her lips before she could consider the propriety of sharing it. No, I'm not." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, afraid to see pity or judgment in Isaac's face. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said finally. "Everyone deserves happiness." She risked a glance at him then. His expression held neither pity nor judgment, only genuine concern and something else, something warm that made her heart beat faster. "My life is comfortable," she said, feeling a need to explain. "I want for nothing material." "But she broke off, struggling to articulate what was missing. "You're not seen," Isaac finished for her. "Not truly." Eleanor's eyes widened at how perfectly he had captured her emptiness. "Yes, exactly that. I'm like a ghost in my own house, present but not present, visible but not seen." Isaac nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling. After my wife died, I spent 2 years working cattle drives, surrounded by men but completely alone. Nobody saw me, they just saw a cowhand doing a job." "Your wife?" Eleanor hadn't known he was a widower. "Sarah." His expression softened with memory. She died in childbirth 6 years ago. We'd been married just 1 year, lost the baby to a boy. I'm so sorry, Mr. Weston. Eleanor's heart ached for his loss. Thank you. It was a hard time. He adjusted his hat against the sun. That's partly why I settled here. Needed to stop running and build something new. They crested a hill, and Isaac reined midnight to a stop. Below them stretched the Sacramento Valley, green and gold in the afternoon light. In the distance, the snow-capped peak of Mount Shasta gleamed against the blue sky. Beautiful, isn't it? Isaac said softly. First time I saw this view, I knew I was home. Eleanor gazed at the landscape, feeling a connection to it she hadn't experienced before. Yes, it's breathtaking. My ranch is over there. Isaac pointed to the east, where a cluster of buildings nestled against the foothills. Not much to look at yet, but I'm making improvements every month. You live there alone? Eleanor asked, then blushed at her forwardness. Isaac didn't seem to mind the question. Just me and my foreman, Hank Turner. He's an old friend from my cattle drive days. Good man. He smiled. And the horses, of course. I'm breeding and training them, specializing in Mustangs nobody else wants to bother with. Like Midnight. Exactly like Midnight. Horses most folks consider too wild or difficult. His eyes met hers. They just need someone to see their true nature, not what others expect them to be. The parallel wasn't lost on Eleanor. She held his gaze, feeling understood in a way she never had before. That's a rare gift, Mr. Weston, seeing what others miss. Isaac, he said quietly, please call me Isaac, at least when it's just us. The request crossed a line of propriety, but Eleanor found herself nodding. Isaac then, and I'm Eleanor. They continued their ride, the conversation flowing easily between them. Eleanor learned that Isaac had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, had fought for the Union in the Civil War, and had come west afterward seeking a fresh start. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, his love of open country, and his dislike of the artifice he saw in town society. In return, Eleanor told him about her childhood in Boston, her love of books and music, and her father's death that had left her with few options but marriage. Thomas seemed kind at first, she admitted as they neared her property. He was established, respected. My aunt thought it a brilliant match. She sighed. I didn't realize how lonely it would be to be admired rather than known. Isaac was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Eleanor, may I be direct with you, please? You deserve more than invisibility. You deserve to be seen, truly seen and heard, and he hesitated. And loved. The word hung between them, charged with meaning. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She knew they were approaching dangerous territory, and yet she couldn't bring herself to retreat. Thank you, Isaac. Her voice was barely above a whisper. For seeing me. They had reached her property line. Ahead, the large house stood silent in the late afternoon sun. Eleanor reined Daisy to a stop, reluctant for their time together to end. Isaac stopped midnight beside her. I've enjoyed our ride, Eleanor. As have I. Very much. He hesitated, then said, I'm breaking in a new mare, gentle disposition but spirited like your Daisy. I ride her out to Whispering Falls most mornings. It's about 3 miles east of here. Beautiful spot. Eleanor understood the implicit invitation. She should refuse. She knew she should. But the prospect of seeing Isaac again, of being in his company where she felt truly alive, was too compelling. I used to ride every morning before my marriage, she said carefully. Perhaps I should resume the habit, for my health. Isaac's smile was understanding. Whispering Falls is at its prettiest around sunrise. Eleanor nodded, her decision made. Thank you for accompanying me home, Mr. Weston. He tipped his hat, returning to formality as they might be observed. My pleasure, Mrs. Montgomery. Good day to you. She watched him ride away, his straight back and broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. Only when he had disappeared from view did she turn Daisy toward the stable, her mind whirling with emotions she dared not name. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn. She dressed quietly in her riding habit and made her way to the stable, where James was already preparing for his morning chores. "Saddle Daisy for me, please, James," she instructed. "I'll be taking a morning ride." If the stable boy found this unusual, he had the good sense not to comment. Soon Eleanor was cantering down the east road, the cool morning air exhilarating against her skin. She found Whispering Falls easily, a small but lovely cascade where a creek tumbled over moss-covered rocks. The rising sun gilded the water, creating a magical effect of light and shadow. And there, beside the falls, sat Isaac Weston on a chestnut mare, waiting. Eleanor's heart leaped at the sight of him. This was madness, she knew, and yet she urged Daisy forward, unable to deny the pull she felt toward this man who saw her so clearly. "Good morning," Isaac called as she approached. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I," Eleanor admitted, bringing Daisy alongside the chestnut mare, "but I couldn't stay away." Isaac's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. "I'm glad." They dismounted and led the horses to the creek to drink. Standing beside the falls, with morning mist rising around them and no human eyes to judge, Eleanor felt a freedom she hadn't experienced in years. "It's beautiful here," she said, watching the play of light on water. "I found it my first week in the area." Isaac stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, though they didn't touch. "I come here to think, to remember who I am beneath all the expectations." Eleanor nodded, understanding perfectly. "To be seen by the falls, if by nothing else." "Exactly." His voice was soft. They stood in silence for a long moment, sharing the beauty of the place and the connection between them that grew stronger with each meeting. "Tell me something true, Eleanor," Isaac said finally. "Something you've never told anyone else." She considered the request, then said, "I write poetry. I have for years. I keep the pages hidden in a book in my room where Thomas never looks." Isaac's expression was one of genuine interest. "What do you write about?" "Freedom, mostly. The mountains." "Wild things." She smiled shyly. "Things I observe but cannot touch. You should touch them," Isaac said softly. "You should be free, Eleanor." The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "It's not that simple." "No," he agreed. "It never is." He took a deep breath. "My turn for a truth. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that day in Mercer's store." Eleanor's heart raced at his confession. "Isaac, I know it's wrong," he continued quickly. "You're married, I respect that, but I had to tell you that I see you, Eleanor Montgomery. I see your intelligence, your gentle spirit, your hidden strength, and you're beautiful not just in appearance but in soul." Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. To be seen so completely, to be valued for who she truly was rather than what she represented, it was overwhelming. "No one has ever seen me as you do," she whispered. Isaac took a step closer, close enough that she could see the varying shades of blue in his eyes. "May I?" he asked, his hand hovering near her cheek. She knew she should refuse. This was beyond impropriety. It was the beginning of something that could destroy her life as she knew it. And yet, Eleanor found herself nodding. His fingers brushed her cheek with exquisite gentleness, as if she were made of the finest porcelain. "You deserve to be cherished," he murmured. "To be heard, to be loved for exactly who you are." The touch of his hand against her skin awakened something long dormant within Eleanor. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to truly feel for the first time in years. When she opened them again, Isaac was watching her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, He leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, a whisper of possibility rather than a demand. Eleanor's hands trembled as they rose to rest against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her palm, strong and steady. When they parted, Eleanor felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her world. "What are we doing, Isaac?" she whispered. "Finding life," he answered simply. "Finding truth." They stood together by the falls as the sun rose higher, talking in low voices about dreams and fears, sharing more truths than Eleanor had spoken aloud in years. When it was time to part, Isaac took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Tomorrow?" he asked. Eleanor knew she should end this now before it went any further, but the thought of returning to her ghost-like existence, never again experiencing this feeling of being truly alive, was unbearable. "Tomorrow," she agreed. And so began the most transformative time of Eleanor's life. Each morning, she rode to Whispering Falls to meet Isaac. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams, discovering each other's minds and hearts. Sometimes they rode further into the hills, exploring places of beauty Eleanor had never seen despite living in the area for 3 years. Isaac told her about his time in the war, the nightmares that still sometimes haunted him, and his journey west seeking peace. Eleanor shared her childhood dreams of becoming a teacher, her love of poetry, and the slow erosion of her spirit under Thomas's indifference. On the 5th morning, as they sat beside the falls sharing a breakfast of bread and cheese Isaac had brought, Eleanor asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "What happens when Thomas returns?" Isaac's expression grew serious. "That depends on you, Eleanor." "On me?" "Yes." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I won't pretend this is simple. You're married. I've crossed a line I never thought I would." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "But I'm falling in love with you." "I think I started falling the moment I saw you in Mercer's store, looking at that blue fabric." Eleanor's heart soared at his words, even as fear clutched at her. "Isaac, I feel the same. When I'm with you, I'm alive in a way I never knew possible. But Thomas is my husband. I made vows." "Vows to a man who treats you like a ghost in your own home, who neither sees nor hears you." Isaac's voice was gentle despite his challenging words. "A marriage should be a partnership of equals, Eleanor, not a prison." She had no answer to that. The truth of his words resonated too deeply. Isaac continued, his voice low and earnest. "I would never ask you to make a decision that would bring you shame or hardship, but I want you to know that if you ever chose to leave, I would be waiting. I would give you a life where you are seen and heard and loved every single day." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. The possibility he offered was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. To leave Thomas would mean scandal, social ostracism, perhaps even poverty if he refused to provide for her. But to stay meant returning to invisibility, to the slow death of her spirit. "I need time," she whispered. "To think, to decide." Isaac nodded, raising her hand to his lips. "Take all the time you need, I'll be here." That night, alone in her bedroom, Eleanor opened the book where she kept her hidden poetry and began to write not a poem this time, but a letter to herself. She poured out her feelings about Isaac, her marriage to Thomas, and the woman she had become versus the woman she wished to be. When she finished, she read the words she had written and knew, with a clarity that both frightened and empowered her, what she must do. The next morning she rode to Whispering Falls earlier than usual, her resolve firm despite her racing heart. Isaac was already there, sitting on a boulder beside the falls. He stood as she approached, his expression a mixture of hope and concern. "Eleanor." She dismounted and walked to him, taking both his hands in hers. "I've made my decision." Isaac waited, his eyes never leaving hers. When Thomas returns, I will tell him the truth, that I cannot continue in a marriage where I'm invisible, that I deserve more." She took a deep breath. "I don't know if he'll grant me a divorce. I don't know what people will say, but I know I cannot go back to being a ghost." Joy spread across Isaac's face, followed quickly by concern. "Are you certain? It won't be easy, I'm certain." Eleanor squeezed his hands. "You've shown me what it means to be truly alive, truly seen. I can't return to the shadows." Isaac drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. "I will stand by you through whatever comes," he promised. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." Eleanor rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For the first time in years, she felt hope bright and sharp and real for her future. "I love you, Isaac Weston," she whispered. "You've made me feel seen and heard and loved when I thought those things were lost to me forever." He tightened his arms around her. "And I love you, Eleanor Montgomery, your strength, your gentle heart, your spirit, all of you." They spent that day planning. Isaac suggested that Eleanor move to his ranch immediately, but she was firm in her decision to face Thomas directly. "I need to tell him myself," she insisted. "I owe him that much honesty at least." Isaac reluctantly agreed. "Promise me you'll be careful. If at any point you feel unsafe, come straight to the ranch. Day or night, I'll be waiting. I promise." Eleanor touched his cheek, still marveling at the freedom to do so. "Thomas isn't violent, just indifferent. I don't fear him physically." Even so, Isaac's expression was serious. "Your safety matters more than anything." They agreed that Eleanor would tell Thomas the day after his return. Then, regardless of his reaction, she would come to Isaac's ranch. They would face the gossip and judgment together. "It won't be easy," Isaac warned again as they prepared to part. "People can be cruel, especially to a woman who defies convention." "I know." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "But I'd rather face their cruelty as a woman fully alive than endure their approval as a ghost." Isaac smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "You are the bravest person I've ever known, Eleanor Montgomery." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Eleanor packed a small trunk with her most essential belongings: clothes, her poetry, a few keepsakes from her parents. She hid it in the back of her wardrobe, ready for a hasty departure if necessary. She continued to meet Isaac at Whispering Falls each morning, their time together both precious and fraught with anticipation. They spoke of practical matters: where she would stay at the ranch, how they would navigate the social fallout, but also of dreams for their future together. "I want to build a house overlooking the valley," Isaac told her as they sat hand in hand beside the falls. "With big windows to catch the light, a library for your books and writing, a porch where we can watch the sunset." Eleanor's heart swelled at the vision. "It sounds perfect." On what would be their last morning at the falls before Thomas's return, Isaac presented Eleanor with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it." Inside was a journal bound in soft blue leather, the color almost identical to the curtain fabric she had chosen. "Isaac, it's beautiful. For your poetry," he explained. "I thought, whatever happens in the coming days, you should have a place to keep your words, a reminder that they matter. That you matter." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. Such a simple gift, and yet so profound in its recognition of who she truly was. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the journal to her chest. Isaac drew her into his arms, kissing her with a mixture of tenderness and passion that left her breathless. "I'll be waiting for you," he promised, "however long it takes." That evening, a telegram arrived from Thomas. His business in San Francisco was concluding more quickly than expected. He would return the following afternoon. Eleanor read the message, a strange calm settling over her. The time for decision was past. Now was the time for action. She wrote a brief response acknowledging the telegram, then went to her room to ensure her trunk was ready. As she packed the last few items, including Isaac's gift of the blue journal, Eleanor caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was different from the ghost who had haunted this house for 3 years. This woman had color in her cheeks, determination in her eyes, and hope in her heart. "I see you," Eleanor whispered to her reflection. "I hear you, and with Isaac I will love you." The next day dawned clear and warm. Eleanor did not ride to Whispering Falls, knowing she needed to prepare the house for Thomas's return. Mrs. Finch noticed her unusual energy, but attributed it to anticipation of her husband's homecoming. "Shall I have cook prepare Mr. Montgomery's favorite roast for dinner?" the housekeeper asked. "Yes, that would be appropriate," Eleanor replied, the decision to maintain normalcy until she had spoken with Thomas already made. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Eleanor checked and rechecked her packed trunk, rehearsed what she would say to Thomas, and tried to quell the butterflies in her stomach. By mid-afternoon, she had changed into a simple, but becoming blue dress, a conscious choice of color that reminded her of Isaac's eyes and the curtains that had started their connection. At precisely 4 o'clock, the sound of carriage wheels on the drive announced Thomas's arrival. Eleanor stood in the entrance hall, hands clasped before her, heart pounding but resolve unwavering. The front door opened, and Thomas entered, removing his hat and handing it to the waiting footman. He looked tired from travel but satisfied the look of a man who had concluded successful business. "Eleanor." He nodded to her, his gaze passing over her blue dress without particular notice. "I trust all has been well in my absence." "Yes, Thomas, welcome home." Her voice was steadier than she had expected. "How was your journey?" "Productive." He moved past her toward his study. "The investors were impressed with our operation. We've secured funding for the expansion." Eleanor followed him, knowing this conversation should happen in private. "That's wonderful news. You must be pleased." Thomas sat at his desk, already sorting through the mail that had accumulated during his absence. "Indeed, it will mean more work in the coming months, but the rewards will be substantial." Eleanor closed the study door quietly and remained standing near it. "Thomas, I need to speak with you about something important." He looked up, mild surprise on his face at her serious tone. "Can it wait? I have correspondence to review." "No." The single word held a firmness that caught his attention. "It cannot wait." Thomas set down his letters, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "Very well. What is it?" Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I'm leaving you, Thomas. I cannot continue in this marriage." For a moment, Thomas simply stared at her as if she had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Then he laughed a short, dismissive sound. "Don't be absurd, Eleanor. What nonsense is this?" "It's not nonsense." She kept her voice level, drawing strength from the memory of Isaac's words. "I've been invisible in this house for 3 years. You neither see me nor hear me. I'm little more than a decorative object to you, useful for entertaining business associates but otherwise irrelevant to your life." Thomas's expression darkened. "Is this about the curtains? Mrs. Finch mentioned you'd redecorated. If you want acknowledgement for household improvements, very well. They look fine." The fact that he thought her discontent could be addressed by a compliment about curtains only reinforced her decision. "This isn't about curtains, Thomas. It's about the fact that you don't know me at all. You've never tried to know me." He stood now, anger beginning to replace confusion. "This is ridiculous. You're my wife. You have a beautiful home, fine clothes, a respected position in the community. What more could you possibly want?" "To be seen," Eleanor replied simply. "To be heard, to be loved for who I am, not what I represent." Thomas's face flushed. "And I suppose you believe you found these things elsewhere. Is that it? Have you been behaving inappropriately in my absence?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I've found someone who values me as a person, yes, who listens when I speak and sees who I truly am." "Who?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising. "Who has put these absurd notions in your head?" "His name is Isaac Weston. He owns the ranch east of town." Thomas's expression shifted from anger to disgust. "The Mustang breeder. That saddle tramp who delivered our fence posts. My God, Eleanor, have you lost your mind?" The contempt in his voice didn't hurt as she had expected it might. Instead, it only confirmed her decision. "Isaac is a good man, Thomas, honorable and kind, and he loves me for myself, not for what I can do for him." "Love," Thomas spat the word. "You speak of love. You made vows before God, Eleanor, vows of fidelity and obedience." "And you vowed to cherish me," she countered quietly, "to honor me." "Have you kept those vows, Thomas?" He stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then he strode to the window, his back to her. "I will not grant you a divorce," he said finally. "The very idea is preposterous. Think of the scandal, the damage to my position." "Your position," Eleanor repeated. "That's all that concerns you, isn't it? Not my happiness, not my well-being, just how it might affect your standing in the community." Thomas turned to face her, his expression cold. "You have been my wife for 3 years, Eleanor. In that time, I have provided everything you could need or want. I have been faithful. I have never raised a hand to you. By any reasonable measure, I have been a good husband." The sad truth was that he believed what he was saying. In Thomas's mind, marriage was a transaction, protection and provision in exchange for social advantage and domestic order. Love, companionship, genuine partnership, these were irrelevant extras, not essential components. "Perhaps by some measures you have been," Eleanor conceded, "but not by mine, not anymore." Thomas's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse to grant a divorce, what then? Will you run off with your cowboy and live in disgrace? No respectable person will receive you. You'll be ostracized, penniless. If that's the price of being truly alive again, I'll pay it gladly." Eleanor's voice was soft but resolute. They stared at each other across the study, husband and wife, yet strangers in all the ways that mattered. Thomas was the first to look away. "This is madness," he muttered. "You cannot be serious. I've never been more serious in my life." Eleanor moved toward the door. "I've packed my things. I'll be leaving tonight." Thomas's head snapped up. "Tonight? You expect me to allow this humiliation?" "I don't expect your permission, Thomas. I'm informing you of my decision as a courtesy." His face flushed dark red. "If you leave this house, don't expect to ever return. I'll cut you off without a penny. You'll have nothing." Eleanor placed her hand on the doorknob. "I'll have myself, and that's more than I've had in 3 years of living as a ghost." She left the study, closing the door quietly behind her. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for a moment, her heart racing but her mind clear. She had done it, spoken her truth, declared her intention. There was no going back now. Upstairs, she retrieved her trunk from the wardrobe. It was small enough to carry, containing only what mattered most to her. As she descended the staircase, Mrs. Finch appeared from the direction of the kitchen. "Mrs. Montgomery." The housekeeper's eyes widened at the sight of the trunk. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving, Mrs. Finch." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "I've informed Mr. Montgomery." Mrs. Finch glanced toward the study, then back at Eleanor. "Leaving, but where will you go?" "To someone who sees me." Eleanor managed a small smile. "Thank you for your service over the years, Mrs. Finch. You've been kind in your way." The housekeeper seemed at a loss for words. Finally, she said, "Let me call James to carry your trunk to the carriage at least." "There's no need for a carriage. I'll be riding Daisy." Mrs. Finch's expression was scandalized. On horseback at this hour, alone. Not alone, Eleanor replied. Not anymore. She walked out the front door without looking back. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Eleanor made her way to the stable, where she found James grooming one of the carriage horses. "James, please saddle Daisy for me." The stable boy's eyes darted to her trunk, then to her face. "Yes, madam, right away." While James prepared Daisy, Eleanor took a moment to look at the house she had called home for 3 years. It was beautiful, imposing in its grandeur. But it had never truly been her home, merely a place where she existed as a shadow of herself. "Your mare's ready, Mrs. Montgomery." James led Daisy out of the stable. "Thank you, James. Would you mind securing my trunk to the saddle?" As the boy worked, Eleanor noticed Thomas watching from the study window. His face was expressionless, a mask that revealed nothing of his thoughts. She met his gaze steadily, feeling neither triumph nor regret, only a profound sense of rightness in her decision. Once the trunk was secured, Eleanor mounted Daisy with James's assistance. "Goodbye, James. Take good care of the horses." "Yes, madam." He touched his cap, eyes full of questions he didn't dare ask. Eleanor turned Daisy toward the east road and nudged her into a trot. She didn't look back at the house or at Thomas's watching figure. Her future lay ahead, not behind. As she reached the property boundary, Eleanor's pace quickened. Daisy seemed to sense her rider's anticipation, breaking into a canter without prompting. The evening air was cool against Eleanor's face, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. The road to Isaac's ranch was familiar now from her mental map of their conversations. 3 miles past Whispering Falls, then a turn to the north at the lightning-struck oak. The sun was setting as she made the turn, painting the western sky in brilliant golds and crimsons. Eleanor crested a final hill, and there below her lay Isaac's ranch, modest compared to Thomas's property but well kept, with a main house, barn, and several corrals where horses grazed in the evening light. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcoming beacon in the gathering dusk. And there, standing on the porch watching the road, was Isaac. Even at a distance, Eleanor could see the moment he recognized her. He vaulted over the porch railing and strode toward the gate, reaching it just as she guided Daisy into the yard. "Eleanor." His voice held wonder and relief as he helped her dismount. "You're here." "I told him," she said simply, her eyes never leaving Isaac's face. "I've left him, Isaac, for good." Without a word, Isaac pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Eleanor returned his embrace, feeling the solid reality of him, the strength and gentleness that had awakened her from her ghost-like existence. "Are you all right?" he asked when they finally drew apart, his hand still on her shoulders as if afraid she might disappear. Yes, and it was true. Despite the uncertainty ahead, despite the social ramifications she would face, Eleanor felt more right than she had in years. "I'm free, Isaac. I'm alive." He smiled, his blue eyes shining in the last light of day. "Welcome home, Eleanor." The word resonated within her home. Not a grand house where she was invisible, but a place where she was seen, heard, and loved. Home. Isaac carried her trunk into the ranch house, which was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and large windows that would fill the rooms with light during the day. A fire burned in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow over the main room. "It's not what you're used to," Isaac said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice as he watched her look around. Eleanor turned to him with a smile. "It's perfect." An older man appeared from what must be the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Thought I heard voices," he said, his weathered face curious as he took in Eleanor's presence. "Hank, this is Eleanor Montgomery," Isaac said, moving to stand beside her. Eleanor, this is Hank Turner, my foreman and friend. Eleanor extended her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Turner. Hank shook her hand, his grip firm but gentle. Likewise, madam. His eyes moved from Eleanor to Isaac and back again, understanding dawning in his expression. I reckon I should see to the evening feed for the horses. Take my time about it, too. Isaac smiled gratefully. Thanks, Hank. When the foreman had gone, Isaac led Eleanor to a chair by the fire. Are you hungry? Thirsty? What can I get you? Just sit with me, she requested, suddenly feeling the emotional weight of the day. Tell me this is real. Isaac pulled another chair close, taking her hands in his. It's real, Eleanor. You're here. You're free. She looked down at their joined hands, her pale, smooth fingers entwined with his sun-darkened, calloused ones. Thomas refused to consider a divorce, she said quietly. He threatened to cut me off without support, said I would be ostracized, disgraced. Isaac's hands tightened around hers. Do you regret coming? No. Eleanor raised her eyes to his. Not for a moment. I just want you to understand what you're taking on. People will talk. Your reputation, I don't give a damn about my reputation, Isaac interrupted gently. All I care about is you, that you're safe. That you're happy. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude for this man who saw her so completely. I love you, Isaac Weston. He raised one hand to cup her cheek, his touch tender. And I love you, Eleanor. I'll spend every day making sure you never feel invisible again. That night, Eleanor slept in Isaac's bed while he took a pallet in the main room. Despite her protests that she didn't want to displace him, he had insisted. There will be time enough for everything, he had said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Right now you need rest. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the night sounds of the ranch so different from the silent grandeur of Thomas's house, Eleanor felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow would bring challenges, she knew. The news of her leaving Thomas would spread quickly through Redding. There would be gossip, judgment, perhaps even confrontation. But she would face it all with Isaac beside her, seeing her, hearing her, loving her. No longer a ghost, but a woman fully alive. The next morning, Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. For a moment, she was disoriented, the simple room unfamiliar after years in Thomas's grand house. Then memory returned, her confrontation with Thomas, her ride to Isaac's ranch, the beginning of her new life. She dressed quickly in a simple skirt and blouse, then made her way to the main room. Isaac was already up, cooking breakfast at the cast-iron stove. Good morning, he said, his face lighting up at the sight of her. Sleep well, better than I have in years. She moved to his side, drawn by the domestic intimacy of the moment. Can I help? You can pour the coffee if you'd like. Mugs are in that cupboard. They worked side by side, preparing a simple breakfast of eggs and biscuits. The easy companionship, the natural way they moved together in the small space, made Eleanor's heart swell with contentment. Hank joined them for breakfast, his initial reserve gradually warming as Eleanor asked interested questions about the ranch and his background. By the time they finished eating, the older man was sharing stories of his cattle drive days with Isaac, his eyes twinkling at Eleanor's genuine laughter. After breakfast, Isaac showed Eleanor around the ranch, the barn where he kept the tack and tools, the corrals where several horses watched them with curious eyes, and the small workshop where he crafted custom saddles. This place was barely standing when I bought it, he explained as they walked. Previous owner let it go to ruin. Hank and I have spent the last 6 months rebuilding, repairing, still plenty to do. It's wonderful, Isaac. Eleanor turned slowly, taking in the rolling pastures, the distant mountains, the sense of possibility that permeated the place. I can feel how much love you've put into it, he smiled, looked pleased by her understanding. "I have plans to expand the main house. Add a proper dining room, maybe a study for you to write in." The thought that he had already been planning a place for her, even before knowing if she would come, touched Eleanor deeply. "I'd like that. Very much." They spent the day working together around the ranch. Eleanor helped feed the horses, gathered eggs from the small henhouse, and assisted Isaac in mending a section of fence. The physical labor was new to her, but satisfying in a way the decorative busywork of her former life had never been. By late afternoon, they were sitting on the porch swing, watching the horses graze in the western pasture, when the sound of an approaching rider caught their attention. Isaac stood, his expression guarded as he recognized the figure on horseback. "It's Sheriff Blake," he said quietly to Eleanor. "Stay here if you'd like. I can speak to him alone." Eleanor rose to stand beside him. "No, we'll face this together." Sheriff Blake was a barrel-chested man in his 50s, with a gray mustache and shrewd eyes that missed little. He reined his horse to a stop at the gate and dismounted, tipping his hat to Eleanor as he approached. "Mrs. Montgomery, Mr. Weston." "Sheriff," Isaac acknowledged. "What brings you out our way?" The sheriff's gaze moved between them, assessing. "I think you know Weston. Had a visit from Thomas Montgomery this morning. He's making some serious accusations." Eleanor stepped forward. "Whatever accusations my husband is making, Sheriff Blake, I can assure you I am here of my own free will." The sheriff nodded slowly. "That's what I figured, madam." "Still, there's talk in town. Ugly talk." "I imagine there is," Eleanor said calmly. "People prefer simple explanations for complex situations." Sheriff Blake's mustache twitched in what might have been approval of her composure. "Montgomery wants to press charges against Weston here. Claims he enticed you away. Seduction, he's calling it." Isaac stiffened beside her. Eleanor placed a restraining hand on his arm. "That's absurd," she said firmly. "I made my own decision to leave a marriage where I was invisible and unheard. Mr. Weston simply showed me the respect and kindness I had been denied for years." The sheriff studied her for a long moment. "Mrs. Montgomery, I've known Thomas for 15 years. He's an influential man in Redding, not someone to cross lightly. Are you here to arrest Isaac?" Eleanor asked directly. Sheriff Blake shook his head. "No, madam. No grounds for that, not when you're clearly here willingly." He sighed heavily. "But I thought you both should know what's brewing in town. Montgomery's on the warpath. Says he'll ruin Weston, run him out of the territory if he has to." Isaac's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "I appreciate the warning, Sheriff, but Eleanor's well-being is what matters here. I can handle Thomas Montgomery. Just be careful," the sheriff advised. "Man like that with his connections. He can make things difficult." After Sheriff Blake departed, Eleanor and Isaac sat on the porch steps, contemplating what his visit meant. "I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door," Eleanor said quietly. "Thomas can be vindictive when crossed." Isaac took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "You have nothing to apologize for, and I'm not afraid of Thomas Montgomery or his threats. Still, we should be prepared." Eleanor's practical nature asserted itself. "He has influence with the banks, with suppliers. He could make it difficult for you to do business." Isaac smiled, a determined light in his blue eyes. "I've faced worse odds, and I have something Thomas Montgomery doesn't." "What's that, you?" He raised her hand to his lips. "Your strength, your courage. And I have the truth that you deserve to be seen and heard and loved. That's worth fighting for." Over the next few weeks, Thomas's threats materialized in various ways. The bank in Redding suddenly recalled a small loan Isaac had taken for ranch improvements. Suppliers mysteriously became reluctant to sell to him. And the gossip in town grew increasingly malicious. painting Eleanor as an unfaithful wife and Isaac as a dishonorable seducer. But for every setback, there seemed to be an unexpected ally. When the Redding Bank recalled Isaac's loan, a smaller bank in the neighboring town of Cottonwood offered financing at better terms. When the general store in Redding refused to fill Isaac's orders, Mrs. Mercer from the dry goods store quietly arranged for supplies to be delivered from her cousin's store in Shasta, and to Eleanor's surprise, not everyone in Redding ostracized her. Mrs. Jenkins, the milliner, sent a note expressing support for her courage in seeking happiness. Dr. Wilson's wife, Mabel, the very woman who had gossiped about Eleanor's conversation with Isaac at the garden gate, now declared to anyone who would listen that Thomas Montgomery had never appreciated that lovely young woman properly. Through it all, Eleanor and Isaac grew closer, their partnership deepening as they faced adversity together. They established a routine at the ranch, rising early to care for the horses, working side by side throughout the day, sharing quiet evenings by the fire. Isaac kept his promise to make Eleanor feel seen and heard in countless ways, asking her opinion on ranch decisions, listening attentively when she spoke, encouraging her poetry, and expressing his love not just in words but in actions large and small. In late July, Isaac surprised Eleanor with a special outing. He saddled Midnight and the chestnut mare, packing a picnic lunch in the saddlebags. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked as they rode out from the ranch under a cloudless blue sky. "You'll see," Isaac replied with a mysterious smile. They rode for about an hour, following a trail that climbed steadily into the foothills. Eventually, they reached a clearing near the top of a ridge. Isaac dismounted and helped Eleanor from her horse. "Close your eyes," he instructed softly. Eleanor obeyed, allowing him to lead her forward several paces. The sun warmed her face, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. "Now look," Isaac said, his voice close to her ear. Eleanor opened her eyes and gasped. Before them stretched a breathtaking vista. The entire Sacramento Valley spread out below, with Mount Shasta's snow-capped peak dominating the distant horizon. Closer, she could see Isaac's ranch, the road to Redding, and Whispering Falls glinting like a silver thread in the morning light. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "This is where I want to build our home," Isaac said, his arm around her waist. "Right here with this view. Windows facing east to catch the sunrise, a wide porch for watching the sunset." Eleanor turned to him, her heart full. "Our home." Isaac reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "I know you're still legally married to Thomas. I know we face challenges ahead, but I want to ask you now, Eleanor Montgomery, will you build a life with me? Will you be my wife in all the ways that truly matter, until the day comes when we can make it legal before the world?" Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. "Yes, Isaac. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It wasn't an official engagement, couldn't be, while she was still married to Thomas, but it was a promise, a commitment more meaningful than her legal marriage had ever been. As the weeks passed, Thomas's attacks gradually lost their intensity. Sheriff Blake visited the ranch again in late August, bringing news that Thomas was considering a move to San Francisco to oversee the expansion of his business interests there. "Word is he's telling folks he's washing his hands of the whole situation," the sheriff reported. "Says he won't waste any more energy on an ungrateful wife and her cowboy." Eleanor received this news with mixed emotions. Relief, certainly, that Thomas might be willing to end his vendetta against them, but also a strange sadness for the man who had never truly known her, who had possessed her as a wife for 3 years, without seeing the woman she really was. By September, when the aspens were beginning to turn golden on the hillsides, A letter arrived from a San Francisco law firm. Thomas was filing for divorce on grounds of abandonment and adultery. While the language of the document was harsh, condemning Eleanor's moral failings and disregard for sacred vows, the practical effect was what mattered: freedom. "He's doing this to save face," Isaac observed as they read the letter together on the porch, making it seem like his decision. "I don't care," Eleanor said simply. "However it happens, it gives us what we want: a chance for a future together without shadows." The divorce was finalized in December 1875, just before Christmas. Thomas remained in San Francisco, never returning to Redding. He sold the grand house to a mining executive, packed away the blue curtains Eleanor had made, and began a new life in the city. Eleanor and Isaac were married on New Year's Day 1876, in a simple ceremony at Whispering Falls. Hank Turner stood as witness, along with Mrs. Mercer from the dry goods store and, surprisingly, Sheriff Blake, who declared himself satisfied to see things put right at last. That spring, they began building their house on the ridge. Isaac insisted that Eleanor help design it, incorporating a library for her books and poetry, large windows to flood the rooms with light, and a wide porch that wrapped around three sides, a place to watch both sunrise and sunset. By the following winter, they had moved into their new home. Standing in the library, arranging her books on the shelves Isaac had built with his own hands, Eleanor was overcome with the journey that had brought her here, from ghost to woman, from invisible to seen, from silence to heard, from unloved to deeply, completely loved. Isaac found her there, tears on her cheeks but a smile on her lips. "What is it?" he asked gently. "I was just thinking about the blue curtains," she said, gesturing to the windows where new curtains hung, these in a warm golden hue that complemented the sunrise they welcomed each morning. How something so small could be the beginning of something so profound. Isaac took her in his arms, his blue eyes the eyes that had truly seen her from the first, gazing into hers with unwavering love. "Not small at all," he corrected softly. "It was the moment you began to reclaim yourself. The moment you started to believe you deserved to be seen. And you saw me," Eleanor whispered, resting her head against his chest. "When I was a ghost in my own house, you made me feel visible again. Real. You were always real, Eleanor." Isaac's voice was tender as he lifted her chin to meet his gaze. "You just needed someone to remind you." In the years that followed, Eleanor and Isaac built a life filled with love and purpose. The ranch flourished as Isaac's reputation for training difficult horses spread throughout the territory. Eleanor began writing stories and poems that found their way into newspapers and magazines, eventually publishing a collection that received acclaim for its authentic portrayal of Western life. They welcomed their first child in 1877, a son they named William, after Isaac's father. A daughter, Sarah, followed 2 years later, named for Isaac's first wife but with Eleanor's full blessing. In 1882, they completed their family with another son, James. Eleanor never regained contact with Thomas, though she heard occasionally through Redding gossip that he had remarried a banker's daughter from a prominent San Francisco family and continued to expand his business interests. She felt no bitterness toward him, only a distant compassion for a man who had never understood that wealth and position meant little without the ability to truly see and value another human being. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac presented Eleanor with a special gift, a second gold band to accompany her wedding ring, this one set with 3 small sapphires. "One for each of our children," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger, "and blue, to remember how our story began." That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, their children playing in the yard below, Eleanor took Isaac's hand in hers. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the ring?" he asked with a smile. "For seeing me," Eleanor replied, "for hearing me, for loving me." Isaac raised her hand to his lips. "Always," he promised, "for all our days." And in the home they had built together, high on a ridge overlooking the valley, Eleanor Montgomery Weston was never invisible again. She was seen, heard, and loved completely, profoundly, and forever.